What did you then I thought? Hello, everyone. Welcome to Midweek Gaming. I'm Nick, over on the head of the comms, of course, just in providing audio commentary, gameplay, and his own breed of madness where applicable. So, Ubisoft wound up in the news again, and once again, it is not for anything good. Though in this case, I'm actually a little surprised with everything that's been going on and kind of reasoning for it. For those who haven't heard, very recently, like a few days ago on the 26th, 27th, big things have been happening in Ubisoft's like upper management shakeup, right? So basically, it's all kind of really started, or I suppose you could say powder kegged off, after Ubisoft announced that it would be delaying its big reveal for its big release date for its next big mainline Assassin's Creed, that being Assassin's Creed Shadows, until I think like February or so, sometime next year. Which is interesting because it was supposed to come out this year, if memory serves. Like, I think like fall, October, around about now. But for reasons, it has been delayed. Now, we can get into the whole why it's been delayed. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't change the fact that it was delayed. And oh boy, did Ubisoft investors not like that. Because it turns out that as the aftermath of that, 10% of Ubisoft shareholders, which ballooned up to like 30% or so this month. Hold up, let me just get these exact numbers here so I'm not quoting funky numbers. According to the Economic Times Tech, which, yeah, that's how you know this is all about money because they're calling themselves the Economic Times. Supposedly, 10% of the video game shareholders' publishers are basically pushing for a massive reevaluation of leadership as a result of all of this. Basically, this all started with AJ Investments, which itself, weirdly enough, holds less than a single percentile, managed to get the other 9 or so percent to basically push back at the developer, saying that with the current underperforming games, so to speak, and thus lack of profit for them, that the current company, which actually, weirdly enough, while researching the story, I learned that supposedly Ubisoft is a family-owned company. Like Yves Guillemot, right? The guy who we're always railing about, generally when it comes to Ubisoft one way or another, the CEO. He's actually the most recent owner of the company, but he is himself a member of the family that founded the company. Apparently, the Guillemots actually founded Ubisoft, and I've just kind of been passing it down from heir to heir, I guess. So yeah, it's technically a family-run company that just happens to be public. But anyways, so basically AJ Investments has basically found a way to get 10% of the shareholders to basically push Ubisoft to basically change up its strategy, so to speak. With the big push basically saying that either one of two things needs to happen. A, Ubisoft either needs to go private, so the Guillemots need to take full control of the company, or B, Guillemot himself and the Guillemots need to step down, because basically what's been happening is that the investors are angry because they're not getting as much money as they promised. Let me just preface this by saying that the biggest reason why the investors are angry right now, and why AJ Investments in particular, and I guess another 9 or so percentile, are angry, and thus where this whole investigation is coming from, is because Ubisoft has been underperforming. Specifically, according to the Economic Times, it's declined by like more than 30% this month, the shares. And this was dated, the letter from AJ was dated, the AJ Investments was dated like September 9th, following Ubisoft announcement of the Assassin's Creed delay by 3 months. And for the year, the stock itself is down by like 50%. Underperforming rivals like, and this is how you know they're in wonderful company, and I quote, Electronic Arts, Take-Two, Software, and Capcom. Or Take-Two Software and Capcom, sorry, I didn't know Software was actually at the end of Take-Two's full corporate title. But when your biggest rivals in corporate stock options are Electronic Arts and Take-Two, oh, that's how you know you're in good company. But basically, with games like Skull and Bones and Assassin's Creed Pandora falling short of the expectations of investors and analysts, which, let me be very freaking clear. As far as I'm aware, outside of Skull and Bones, none of the games being cited, including Star Wars Outlaws later on in this very article, were themselves flops. Like outside of Skull and Bones, which yes was a massive money sink, was a massive flop. No one's arguing that. It was basically a many-year, multi-year nightmare for Ubisoft for some say contractual reasons. Like there's a little bit of conspiracy and speculation as to how that game wound up being what it is. But anyways, basically outside of that whole mess, I wouldn't say, as far as I know, and I don't think anyone's outright said, and the numbers don't outright say, that either Pandora, Outlaws, or any of the games outside of Skull and Bones that are being cited flopped. Like, they didn't do bad. Like, as far as we know, Assassin's Creed or Star Wars Outlaws basically actually did pretty well its first few weeks. It's just been petering out the next few weeks. But unfortunately, for investors, when they don't meet their self-appointed numbers, they get angry. And yeah, they're kind of blaming the Guimauds for all that kind of nonsense because, like I said, these are apparently the same investors who I guess support companies like EA and Take-Two, which, if you know their business practices, you kind of understand why these investors are so angry, or at the very least, you understand why they're so angry from a conceptual point of view. They are money, money, and money first. So, yeah. It is, yeah. And with the massive delay of Assassin's Creed Shadows, which, again, remind you, is kind of Ubisoft's bread and butter for the last 15 odd 20 years, 15, 20 years, something like that. Yeah, it basically pushed any kind of big sales figures that Ubisoft could have. Because remember, self-appoint, like, expectations, right? It's these games, when a company says a game underperformed, our expectations. That doesn't mean it failed financially. Because here's the thing, in corporate, expectations is just a slang term for we thought it would do better, but it didn't. But that doesn't mean it necessarily did poorly. It just means that whoever was the one who was, setting the standards, those standards weren't met. Standards which are, generally speaking, completely arbitrary. Because again, when it doesn't meet expectations, it doesn't mean that it didn't itself do financially well. It just means it didn't make all the money, not that it didn't make money at all. And Assassin's Creed always brings in major money for Ubisoft. And considering that with the delay, that means that Assassin's Creed will not only be pushed out of the fall window, but also the Christmas-December window, which is when games tend to sell one of the best times. That means that all that Christmas money that Ubisoft's investors could hope to see is officially gone. So,
That's not gonna
yeah.
end well.
Yeah, that's not going to end well when you give investors that like to support these types of companies, you go to them and say, yeah, we're not going to give you as much money. That never ends well. And it's not. Because, like I said, it's ending in like a call for completely remanagement. Now that we've kind of discussed what's happening, we can kind of discuss more into the depths of why this is happening. Because again, as we previously mentioned, the Guimau family, which Yves himself is the most recent. Yves? I think I'm saying that name right. Yeah, Yves Guillemot. I think I'm saying that right. Anyways, the Guillemot family themselves owns like 15% of Ubisoft, which itself doesn't sound like that much. But when you consider the fact that the next biggest shareholder beneath them is Tencent, which owns just under 10%, again, according to the financial article, and the rest of, I'm guessing, the 70 odd, 80 odd percent, I think I'm doing my numbers right there, are subdivided between like individuals with, like I said, AJ investments owning like less than 1%. My guess is that, the Guimauds might have a minority share when you do like the 50-50 share percentages, but there's really nobody who has enough shares to challenge their decision making because there's too much subdividing among the shareholders. So my guess is the Guillemot family still has a major hand in how Ubisoft is run. And while it seems, again, according to the financial article, that Guillemot family and Tencent aren't exactly like giving official statements to this whole debacle, with both of them refusing a comment from the actual Economic Times when they reached out to both the companies. That nonetheless doesn't exactly mean that, well, obviously they're feeling it. I don't think Tencent really cares, but because they have way more than one company making them money, so it's not like a big deal for them, but it might mean a lot for, again, groups like AJ Investments, right? So, now that we kind of spoke about, like, again, why this is happening, we could sit here and debate like, the underlying reasons for this. I mean, yeah, we kind of did with, like, investors being angry about where's my money, but, when you look at it from, like, an actual, like, outpoint, like, not why are the investors angry, but, like, how did we get here? In terms of, like, quote unquote underperforming games and stuff like that. Uh, Honestly, there are a few theories on both the end of the spectrum, right? Like, for example, one article I have from Fast Company literally says that the whole DEI, which is basically short business slang for those who aren't aware, for I think it's like diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
So basically, the corporate term for you know, make more everything is kind of the possible reason for some of this. Like, there are some people, like, again, this article that kind of point out to the whole, Ubisoft's push for diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of is the reason why the numbers are not as good as they should be or as they want to be. And you could also just sit there and say that, well, the numbers themselves aren't the problem per se. It might just be that the investors are getting a little too uppity because their stocks fell. I mean, if the Wall Street crash of back in the day taught us anything, it's that investors tend to panic when the number drops by like even a percentile. So it's hard to say. I mean, if we kind of go down the equity and inclusion backlash, you see that like, you know, I mean, remember that also beyond just delaying its main game, they also canceled their Tokyo Game Show appearance. So that kind of sends bad signs. And while, again, some technically speaking, Star Wars Outlaws is kind of the reason behind the the delay because of its performance. This article also kind of points out the idea that there is a far right opposition to the diversity and inclusion push that Ubisoft has been going on for years. It kind of goes into it by saying, Outlaws has a female lead character, and most reviews criticized it, gave it a 0 rating, 0 out of 10 on Metacritic apparently, with apparently Metacritic itself citing a forced DEI narrative. And supposedly, again, I've yet to claim these myself because I haven't yet to dig these up. But supposedly, again, the article claims that according to Metacritic, there was also a claim for like, the developers spent more time on woke culture than the story and gameplay, which again, I can definitely see it. I hate using the term woke or even DEI because with some companies it can be such a buzzword, and I personally like to judge beyond that. But you know, I can definitely see with Ubisoft being who they are, that kind of a problem. again, it
You
is
can see the problem with it overall.
yeah, like when it comes to Ubisoft in particular, like I said, usually I don't like using that as a term because usually it's just a bunch of smoke and fire, the boy who cried wolf, so to speak. But with Ubisoft, I can actually see that being a potentially valid reason because I mean, remember, just look at Assassin's Creed itself, right? It went from being a game focused on like, okay, let's go and, murder people or something like that. Oh my God, I'm trying to say it's not getting canceled. but
they
uh
they
but
went to assassinate the people.
yeah, I mean it basically started off as like a heavy, your traditional like, assassin, go assassinate things, do this, secret societies, bunch of stuff like that. And then you have nowadays controversies surrounding Black Samurai and like Gay Ninjas, I think, or something like that. I don't know. I don't remember what the most recent controversy for Shadows' like gameplay was beyond the old Black Samurai thing, but like you get things like that, and so you do wonder if that does affect sales slightly, but I don't know, right? A lot of people do say, like I said, that Ubisoft very much does push diversity and equity extremely in their games, arguably to some degree the detriment of the game itself. So I do wonder, like I said, if that has to do with a decreased performance. Assassins or not Assassin's Creed. When it comes to Outlaws itself, I know one of the big critiques, excuse me, of that game wasn't specifically its push on like a female character, but like me and Justin were actually talking about this a few months ago, and you said that was more like what was it? You said like
There,
wooden dialogue and stuff like that.
there, yeah, like there are moments within the game that don't, one, don't feel natural, and two, make it feel like it's forced or ignorant. Like from what I remember, there was a moment in the game where there's these stormtroopers who are like, "Oh, we gotta chase you down," and then all of a sudden they just kind of forget about you. Like just as quickly as like, "We need to stop you. We need to chase you down." To, "Oh yeah, no, we don't need to care about this anymore." Like it feels ungenuine to the actual universe in many regards when it comes to like how different entities, how different groups should act, how they should react. And
Hmm.
it feels like it's all like a forced narrative. And sure, that's exactly what that kind of style of game is meant to be, but there's two ways you can go about doing that kind of game. You can either do a forced style game where it's like, all right, it's all narrative. No matter what you do, your choices don't exactly matter. The narrative will always be the same, but you're gonna still see the universe react to your actions in different ways. Or it's all just 100% forced, and then it just, the universe has no reaction to anything you do.
Yeah, which I think at the end of the day, right? Like as much as it is fun and kind of the kind of trend right now to kind of criticize big companies such as Ubisoft and Disney who do feel like they push diversity and inclusivity and whatnot very extremely. That feels like almost the trend now to kind of push them against that. And again, you can make a case of whether that's justified or not. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to Ubisoft in particular, at least when it comes to Outlaws, it feels like there were other reasons than that possibly being the only thing that dips sales. Like again, as you said, there are moments where the game just doesn't feel genuine. I mean, yeah, it's true. Stormtroopers are comically bad at shooting, but
Well,
when it comes to
that's
doing their
the
job
thing.
and
It's
other
like,
reasons,
that's the thing though. It's like the comically bad thing, being bad at shooting, only comes from the one movie at which the whole reason why they were bad at shooting was because it was all a trap, and you could see Tarkin going and talking to Vader, going and saying, "This is a very big risk, going and letting these rebels get away to go to the base." But
which
everyone's
I think,
run with it, and it is a funny joke. But at
I
some
also think it
point,
was like
people.
lore-wise they were bad at shooting, but anyways.
No, no, it all comes from, I think it's all A New Hope, where like the stormtroopers in the Death Star are purposely missing the rebels in order to let the rebels escape, while the Millennium Falcon has a tracker on it, allowing them to find the base on Yavin.
Hmm. Yeah, but, yeah, well, that's
But
a discussion for later.
no,
But
no, no,
anyways,
well,
moving.
nonetheless, well, no, it kind of is important here because that kind of trope, the idea of oh yeah, the characters being bad shots, like it's funny, but it's gotten to a point where certain story writers for Star Wars have made it the core identity of the stormtroopers, and it gets to a point where it's like, all right, now it's just boring because it's the same thing over and over. You already know exactly what's gonna happen next.
Yeah, and like I said, and I get and like and I do believe that that actually was a thing beyond the whole Yavin 4 theme. I believe that's a thing since like the very beginning, and I think it also has to do with the fact that they were just crappily trained because Palpatine wanted numbers over actual skill. But again, when even when you put aside the whole talk of like stormtroopers being terrible at aiming, and yes and no whether you agree with that or not. But anyways, the whole point of the story, right, is that like beyond their terrible aiming, there's really nothing in the lore that says, okay, they were bad at their job in other ways as well. At least as my knowledge goes. And when you have things like this, it does make you feel like, okay, maybe that is just bad writing.
Yep.
Like again, whether you believe in Ubisoft being, too forceful in DEI and, the same applies for, when discussions when Disney's in the room, when it comes to at least Ubisoft in this case, I do believe it's also just a case of sometimes Ubisoft just does bad writing. I mean, hell, freaking, not Assassin's Creed, freaking, Pandora had a similar kind of like, basically, it was basically, you know, what if Far Cry, but on Pandora, effectively. Like it was literally Avatar Pandora Edition, or freaking Avatar Far Cry Edition, or Far Cry Avatar Edition probably sounds better. Yeah, Far Cry Avatar Edition. And here's the thing, right? Far Cry isn't exactly known for its revolutionary writing, and to my knowledge, it never really has been, or at least it hasn't for a very long time. Not since like maybe two.
Hmm.
And I guess three, Voss is kind of an interesting character, but like three is, I think, is possibly nostalgic. Remember, but anyways. Beyond that, they were never really known for their revolutionary writing. So it might just be that these games just don't perform as well because, well, they're just, not exactly A game material. But again, setting aside the whole, reasoning, so to speak, it does leave us, like I said, at this position where investors are kind of angry over where's my money. Which,
Yeah.
again, I find hilarious because it's kind of forced this odd position because, you know, now Ubisoft is legitimately in trouble because its investors are quite literally pushing for either the company to go private or to change management from the Guillemot family to somebody else. Which, for those who wouldn't be aware of like how that would work, at least from a practical standpoint, well, it's easy to assume just Yves would step down and the Guillemot family would appoint someone who is not in the family to be CEO. And I remember while I was reading for this piece, it was funny because some people say that Ubisoft is one of the biggest examples of nepotism, which honestly, with how many things they've been accused of over the years and like all the things that came of it, I'm not exactly surprised. Like, who remembers that whole debacle about the whole I can't remember if it was like specifically sexual harassment or just like a dumb management. The guy who said women don't sell and all the nonsense that came from him.
Right.
He was in charge of the Ubisoft. He was in charge of the Assassin's Creed franchise basically exclusively for many, many years. And a bunch of allegations came out against him. And here's the funny part. Not only was he extremely powerful, supposedly he was also Yves' personal friend. I mean, how he could do all these things for years and Yves just, never did anything about it or just didn't notice it. Or didn't care. One of the three, possibly all three, who knows? And literally, when the investors confronted him about this, his answers were, I wouldn't say dismissive, but definitely not exactly answering the question. And while, as a business student, you can say, well, CEO doesn't know every thing that happens beneath him, and yada, yada, yada. Kind of the whole, who will think for the multimillionaires? But in this particular instance, I do believe that it is kind of shocking and unbelievable that a man who, again, was supposedly a good friend of Yves personally, Yves was himself unaware of his less than good tendencies in the company at large, and how, to some degree, many employees were legitimately afraid of him as a result. Like, you can't tell me Yves did not at least suspect this for years. And if he did, maybe he figured it out and just turned a blind eye. And like I said, that has nothing to do with the fact that, like I said, researching this piece, I realized that basically this is a family-held company that is technically a publicly traded firm. So, maybe the cry of nepotism being one of Ubisoft's greatest sins isn't entirely unwarranted here. But basically, going back to my previous point, how it would work if Yves stepping down, like I said, would literally just be the board appointing a member that is not of the Guimau family lineage, which itself would, like I said, strip the Guimau family of a great chunk of power in the company in practical terms. Which would probably be a better idea, not gonna lie, because I do believe that having a publicly traded firm, yet the family still has the CEO who's also on the board of directors, is technically a conflict of interest, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that's illegal in certain places. But what do I know? It's France. Maybe they have different laws there.
Maybe. Maybe they
In
do.
the case, and also remember, it's the Guimau family that holds the percentage, not Yves himself. So maybe they use that to get around that. I don't know. But anyways, the other possibility, like I said, is the other thing that the investors are starting to call for, and that is basically the Ubisoft itself to basically take itself off the stock market and basically go private again. With and this kind of shows you, like I said, the kind of hand of the investors, with the investors basically saying, okay, either right the ship and make us money now, or buy us out so we can make money again now. Because for those who aren't aware, basically what happens when a company takes itself off the stock market, it's not a thing that happens all too often, especially with big companies like Ubisoft. Basically, what would have to happen is the Guimau family, who again founded the company and are still, like I said, holding a majority share by all accounts, uh, would have to basically buy out all the other investors on the market, including Tencent, including AJ Holdings, including all the other investors, the other like 11 or not 11, the other like, 89% beyond these two individuals, buy them out and basically hold the shares in them entirely in and of themselves, where they would then take it and basically make it private again. They would take the listings off the market. And if you haven't put the pieces together here, let me just spell it out for you. That's expensive.
Yes.
It is one of the reasons why it happens so very rarely. Because, yes, it does give a company control over itself again. They don't have to answer to investors. But they have to basically buy out the other investors, which, you know,
Doesn't always
investors buying
go well.
it doesn't go well. It's just that like investors buying out other investors itself isn't unheard of in the stock market industry. It's very common, in fact. But when a company has to literally buy back all of their shares to go private, that's expensive. One investor buying out another investor isn't unheard of, but a company buying out all the investors, yeah, that's not very common because, like I said, it's very expensive. So, yeah. Like I said, at the end of the day, this whole debacle basically comes down to the fact that the investors are finally getting extremely pissed at the fact that they're not making all the money anymore, which it sounds really stupid for me to say that, but I do believe that at the end of the day, this really is the crux of it. Again, you can sit here and, or we can sit here and debate, maybe it's a diversity push, maybe the games just aren't that good. Want my advice? I'm wagering, if anything, it might be a bit of column A and a bit of column B. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really change the fact that it's not that these games are not financially successful. Don't get me wrong. To my knowledge, Assassin's Creed and I believe Outlaws were financially successful. They made their money back. But as has been very clearly demonstrated with this whole debacle surrounding Ubisoft, for investors, often making money back isn't enough. No, no, no. They don't want to make money and then some. They want to make all the money back and then all the rest of the money that they did not have. Or as I once had it put, they don't want to just make money. They want to make all the money. And when they don't, they get angry. Which, at the end of the day, is pretty much what this is. Investors are angry that they're not making all the money anymore. And again, it these games fell short of expectations, which in corporate jargon translated is a purely arbitrary number. You know, whether a project meets expectations or not is generally an arbitrary number. I mean, yeah, sure, there's some predictions of like, okay, previous games did this well, so we're expecting it to do this well, and da 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 da. I mean, hell, I think Destiny is itself kind of, weirdly enough, going back to Bungie for a hot second. I know they're completely irrelevant in terms of physical to the story, but I think they're a good comparison here. It's like, despite, you know, um, Final Shape being heralded as one of the best expansions by the fan base in terms of, overall narrative and this and that, and, you know, again, excusing what came after for a hot minute and stuff, but like, just taking it as a whole, it is considered as one of the best expansions in Destiny's history, but when you look at it from a financial numbers standpoint, it actually sold worse than Lightfall, which is in quite stark contrast heralded as the worst expansion in Destiny history, or at least one of them. So, it's kind of like, and hell, if we want to take this back even further, let's take it back to the Activision days when they were still held by Activision. Activision literally went on record and said at the time, and this was like around Forsaken era and stuff like that, back when Destiny was still very much making a lot of money and didn't have the current debacles they do now, that even despite all the money Bungie was raking in for Activision, that Activision was displeased by Bungie's leadership, or perhaps I should say Destiny itself, because it was underperforming. Remember, this is Destiny Forsaken era. Destiny was making a lot of money at this point. And yet, Activision still went on record and said, nah, not good enough. With, again, Bungie promptly clapping back, saying, we're quite happy with the numbers, actually. Which, like I said, just goes to show that when it comes to expectations from, like, investors, they are completely arbitrary. It doesn't mean a game is not financially successful. Both Bungie at the time and Destiny at the time and the Ubisoft games we're discussing in this piece, again, Pandora, Outlaws, etc., they are all, well, maybe not Skull and Bones, again, but that's an outlier. But these games were all, to my knowledge at least, financially successful. They didn't, lose Ubisoft money. They just didn't make Ubisoft enough money, or should I say they didn't make the investors enough money. They thought they'd make more and they didn't. And they're angry now because they think they lost money that they think they're owed. That's
And
pretty much what this comes down to at the end of the day. Investors are angry because they didn't make what they believed they were owed. And
the amount that they want.
yeah, the amount that they want is not what they got. So they're either demanding Ubisoft change leadership to make them more money or buy them out so they can get, all their money back effectively. It's akin to going to an investor saying, I'll make you money, and you make the money, and then when you go back to the investor and say, I made you money, the investor goes, okay, so where's the rest of it?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what this boils down to at the end of the day. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about this. Ubisoft is still very much, like I said, in trouble, though, because this is still 30% of the board that's calling for this, and it might be even larger now. And if it gets over a majority position, like over 51, 52% majority, then they might actually straight up launch in a full-on investigation if they haven't already. I think I remember reading they might have already into like the practices of Ubisoft. And this time it's not for sexual allegation reasons, so that's a first. But you know. So Ubisoft is in trouble.
Yep.
But for the first time, I actually don't care about the victims, supposedly one bit, because they're not even victims. It was one thing when the Ubisoft was being when Ubisoft was being accused of, like I said, the whole sexual allegations and terrible work culture and all that nonsense. Because, people legitimately got hurt or terrorized or whatnot in that case. And that's not good. But when investors come in and start crying about their frickin' hedge funds not being good enough, forgive me, friend, but you don't need all the money. And that is me saying that as a business
Like
student,
that's
so
the thing though. Like at the end of the day, it makes sense that you get returned the amount that you've provided. And
yeah,
then if it does like things do really well, you get like a small percentage extra on top of it because like you obviously helped fund it, so it makes sense that some of that goes and like pays you. That way you get a little more earning out of it as well. But at some point, it becomes a little greedy to expect a really large sum of the entirety of the money, and none of that goes to anyone else.
yeah. And I think at the end of the day, we have to remember that the biggest reason, and I think, like I said, the financial article actually pointed this out majorly. Prior to this point, the biggest competitors in the financial space for Ubisoft were Activision and Take Two. You know, the frickin' Call of Duty uh, 2K guys. Those guys. The guys who make games that's basically recycled content to print money.
Yep.
That is who their major competition is. Which, if you ask me, is also probably a good sign that they're probably invested in by the same people, roundabouts. And, yeah. If you know anything about the practices of these two companies, you
Mm-hmm.
immediately realize where my apathy is coming from. Because these are companies that they don't care about end product at the end of the day. These games could be absolute schlock for all they care. They just want all the money. So, my previous joke about them crying over their hedge funds, I hate to say it, but probably isn't too far off. And at the end of the day, that's the big issue, right? Who would have thought? The big thing that possibly sinks Ubisoft, it's not the allegation. It's not anything to do with workers' culture. It's when the company stops making all the money and it's greedy as all hell it's greedy as all hell investors, you know, finally get tired of waiting for their next $1 million check to come in or something.
Yep. $500,000.
Yeah, something like that. Which, again,
And that's the big thing. Like a lot of profits overall. like for a game, a lot of them nowadays, you're getting like maybe 20% of the initial price, maybe 15% of the initial price overall profit. And that's like accounting for marketing and all the development needed. Like that's all the money that went into the game in order to like develop it. So at some point that money isn't gonna be enough and you're gonna need to like go and I don't know, like it's so much money that's being expected to be utilized in the way they want, but yet like that small amount of profit has to go to the developers as well. It has to go to all the people who helped make the project.
I literally just looked it up, just out of curiosity, right?
Hmm.
Just in Frontiers of Pandora alone, and this is from as of January 24, so it's probably made way more at this point. The amount of money, the actual revenue. Now, granted, revenue is not profit. Let's remember, in business terms, revenue and profit are different. Revenue is just base money. Profit is everything after expenses. But in terms of pure revenue, right? Minus deductions for expenses and crap like that. The game made 133 million in revenue.
Yep.
Now, granted, this is probably not the best example because I'm sure the licensing fee alone cost them at least a few million. Because remember, this is technically, if you ask someone like Jason Cameron, or James Cameron, a very expensive franchise. Which, don't get me wrong, I like Pandora, I like Avatar. Not sure how much I'd value it at, though. But, it basically, like I said, made 133 million in revenue.
Hmm.
So it's a lot of money, and that is, like I said, as of January 24, as of late 20 January 24. So it's probably way more now. So that's a lot of money. Granted, like I said, how much of that after deductions and expenses is left? Who can say? But well, yeah, let me just look up the budget real quick. Looks like there's no official numbers given for this.
I mean, a lot of the numbers tend to be fairly hidden. You don't get them all.
I mean, supposedly, according to one kind of reset era article, it possibly cost them more than like 120 million. So, eh, maybe that's not as much. Maybe that's only like 10 or 20 million, all things considered. But again, even so, that's still 10 or 20 million in profit, which ain't bad.
No.
Like, even if it only made them $10 million back in profit, after deductions and expenses, being that it was such an expensive game. And again, like I said, most of it probably went to, like, licensing fees and stuff like that. But, like, even after all of that, that's still not bad. 10, 20 million. Hell, a lot of studios would kill for that kind of money. But like I said, for some investors, it's just not enough.
They want the majority, if not all of
Yeah.
it. And then people wonder why developers left, right, and center basically are leaving like studios and or getting laid off because they don't have the money. Like all of the money is being taken elsewhere.
I mean, yeah, like I said, it's one of those kind of like again, we can use this as another point to like joke at Bungie just for the sake of taking pot shots at them. Ever since the whole business with Yves Guillemot, or not Yves Guillemot, freaking the CEO of Bungie, whose name escapes me at the moment. his whole car collecting hobby of like winning multi-million-dollar car auctions every month kind of came to light. People have been kind of using that as kind of a running joke when it comes to discussing why Bungie's in such a piss poor state, so to speak. Because instead of using that money to fund, the company, the CEO has primarily acquired it, it possibly seems, to fund his car collecting addiction.
Yeah.
His multi-million-dollar car collecting addiction, which he continues once at least a month. But, you know, we can sit here and debate, how many assets does he have on the side? Possibly he has other, investments as well. Maybe he just has that much in stock options. You know, all of that aside, I think much like Ubisoft in this case, when you look at Bungie, I think you can summarize both of these issues at the end of the day in one way. Regardless of the validity of these claims, regardless of if the Bungie CEO did kinda, possibly, maybe misappropriate funds for his car
Perhaps.
collecting hobby, or maybe, possibly, if Yves Guillemot's leadership is driving Ubisoft into the ground financially, regardless of the legitimacy of these claims, when looking from the outside in, which granted, remind you, we don't have as much information as the investors do. Remember, there's a lot of back talk or backroom talk that happens with investors outside of the boardroom and in. So it's possible they know a lot of things we don't. They have connections we don't. But when looking from the outside in, even with the lack of information, you can say without a doubt that it's not a good look.
No.
So,
Nope. Yep. It's it's a situation that always keeps giving.
hmm. So, there we kind of have it. That's kind of Ubisoft's current debacle. How will this end? I genuinely don't know. Like I said, if it gets a majority share, a decision making, perhaps there will be a full blown investigation, if not already. I think I remember reading there may have already been launched a investigation. And who knows what they'll turn up if they do find investigation. Like I said, maybe Guillemot's leadership and the Guillemot family's leadership in general just is not that good. Like I said, they turned a blind eye to the whole business surrounding all that, sexual allegation stuff for many years. So, you never know. Possibly nepotism and a few other crimes are kind of driving the company into the ground. Like I said, but this one's far more murky than, like I said, the whole business surrounding Bungie, because this one is investors crying over their hedge funds and stock options, and games not making as much as they're predicted, which, in and of itself, says nothing, because, like I said, the one thing you learn in business when discussing finances, among other things, is that when it comes to investor expectations, 99% of the time, in fact, pretty much all of the time, it is a completely arbitrary number. As my accounting professor would say, where's the cutoff point? Well, it's wherever the investors say the cutoff point is. And when it comes to meeting expectations, it very much is just whatever the investors consider to be, a worthy or a worthwhile payback amount, you know? Because like I said, these games are, at the end of the day, making millions of dollars in profits. But is that enough for some investors? As we're starting to see,
Probably not.
the
Probably
answer might very well be no. So there you have it. That's Ubisoft in a nutshell. Any end closing thoughts, Justin?
Nope.
Alright, then. We'll let you go then. We've been yammering on for probably at least an hour. So,
We've been
I'll
going
stop
for
talking.
50 minutes, so yeah. We've been
Why do you
yammering
not
on.
say anything?
It's okay. We just talk. We talk.
You're, we're trying to keep this short, bloody hell. Alright then.
Hopefully you all did enjoy, though.
hopefully you all did enjoy, and we'll see you all next week. Hell, maybe Bungie will do something soon. We actually can get an official show about them. Have a good one, ladies and gentlemen.